Great privilege to have with us here this morning Mr. Chris Lucas, founder and owner of the Lucas Collective, a world-class hospitality group that is home to some of Australia's most loved and respected restaurants, including, amongst others, Maison Batard, Chin Chin, Society, Lillian, Hawker Hall, Tombo, Den, Carlotta, Yakimono, and of course Grill Americano in Melbourne, and the recently about to open Grill Americano here in Sydney. Chris, welcome to the program. Appreciate the opportunity to share your journey. You grew up in a fairly modest household in Geelong. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing and perhaps some of your Greek heritage, if you could.
My story is like a lot of typical Australian families that started off, with an immigrant background. My father and mother arrived here, obviously, from Greece. And my dad quickly got to work as a cook and eventually got to buy his own pub. And, I grew up in that sort of small family business environment in rural Geelong. I mean, it's not so rural nowadays. It was pretty rural when I was a kid. Of course, Geelong was dominated by those days by the big Ford factory. So it was a very working class environment, but, it was a warm and, very loving environment, and taught me a lot about the hospitality business from a very young age. I was serving plates when I was 5 and 6 years old. I think my father instilled in me the real ethos of hard work and be able to respect how hard it is to actually make a living in small business. So I think that's held me in good stead over the years.
Tell me about the influence of your Greek heritage in terms of, how that's parlayed into your career as a restaurateur and a property investor and so many other things that you do. But how has your Greek heritage sort of influenced you, do you think?
Well, I think probably the most important thing is that, having a European background, be it Greek or Italian or, any one of those sort of Mediterranean cultures especially, they're very hospitable. I mean, if you go to any part of a Greek island or Italy or Spain for that matter, we find the people, they're very warm and very caring and very inviting, and they're always there wanting to please. And I grew up with that very typical Greek mentality, which was, you welcome people into your home and, you try to make them feel comfortable and give them a great experience. And, we did that, of course, in my dad's pubs. I mean, we used to, go to probably more trouble than most in those days to try and give them a real family sort of experience where they can come in and people could feel very, very, very much a sense of hospitality. And I think that's probably the most important thing. I mean, that's ingrained in my DNA to a certain extent. And I think in the restaurant business, while you've got to have a lot of other skills, you do have to have a genuine love of greeting and looking after people, because it's a service-based industry.
Tell me about early influences in your life. Was there a particular direction that you saw yourself going down? Obviously, like you said, you sort of grew up in that pub environment. Did that sort of influence your career path?
It did a bit. Well, I mean, I think that it left always this sort of burning ambition to some way, get back into the family business or open my own restaurant. Despite the fact that in those days, restaurants were not first of all, there weren't that many restaurants around. They're mostly pubs and clubs and so forth. But it's an intoxicating sort of business. I don't know what it is about restaurants, but for me anyway, there's this allure of wanting to, be in the business, and I have a true sense of loving this business. I couldn't actually imagine myself doing anything else, even though I've done a lot of things in my life. I mean, my father never really wanted me to go into this business for good reason. I mean, he was a typical immigrant that came to Australia and wanted something better for his children, which was a university education, as far as he was concerned. And so, of course, I went off to university and started pharmacology, but I wasn't much good at it. I guess maybe because I didn't really have a passion for it. But then it led me to another career, which was, I came out of university and joined, at the time, probably the most successful marketing company in the world, which was IBM, biggest computer company in the world at the time. And that was a great experience for me, because as a young man coming out of university at 21 years of age, and just coming from Geelong, I really hadn't experienced the world at large. And with IBM, I was given an opportunity to go all over the world and, learn from some of the most advanced technologies that were at the time just emerging. The IBM PC had only just been invented. Microsoft had only just sort of formed. Apple was in its infancy. So it was a very exciting time to be in the industry. Great learning experience for me. I got to go to places like Silicon Valley when it was very early days. I could go to New York and work at headquarters there, and Tokyo, and so I became a bit of a global citizen, and I learnt the importance of the brand and how important, curating, developing, and making sure that your brand is always constantly at the forefront of innovation, making sure that you're ahead of the curve. And so I think if there's anything I learned in those days with what was the world's best marketing company, was that you had to always constantly think about what's next. How innovative can you be? Don't accept that, if you're successful today, that's automatically going to translate to success tomorrow. Because I was working in the fastest moving, and even today, we see how fast technology is moving. You're looking at the AI boom here today, and what is successful 6 months ago in terms of, let's say, chip technology, could almost be out of date today. And so, data center technology is moving at a huge pace. So, that for me, it became second nature, learning to work and thrive and succeed in an industry where you had to be constantly thinking about what's the next successful thing. I mean, I was there when, Nokia came in and became the most dominant phone company in the world, and then a few years later it was broke. I was there when Kodak was dominating the photography industry, and, someone in Japan invented the digital camera, and then someone stuck it on a phone. And so, you look at these businesses at the time, and they were dominant businesses. In some cases, Nokia controlled 70% at one stage of the world's production and sales of mobile phones, and literally a few years later it was broke. So it was an industry, as I said to you, where it really gave me an unbelievable global understanding of how business operates on an international scale, and how you've got to be, you've got to be never able to accept the status quo. And of course, as I moved out of that world back into so-called the family business after a very successful career where I'd also started my own IT company, my own telecommunications business. We sold those and moved on, and then I moved into the property business. And then I inherited a restaurant, and here I am today, 20 years later. Everyone talks about how successful our restaurants are and how amazing they are, but they came from those early years. The fact that I look at restaurants a lot differently than what the industry does. I see restaurants as a brand, and I see them on a global basis. I guess a lot of people talk about our restaurants and say, "Oh, wow, they're truly international in many respects." And that's exactly what I set out to do, is to bring the world to Australia. Melbourne and Sydney are very much today global cities. 5-6 million people, big cities, amazing cities in many regards. And so I've sort of hopefully played a bit of a role in helping elevate the F&B experiences in those cities, so that we are on a level playing field with anyone else in the world.
You touched on it there. Obviously, you had a career at IBM, and then you started your own IT business. How did all that come about, and walk us through perhaps a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, well, I'd say, I guess the other thing when you're in a family business is entrepreneurship. So while the sense of hospitality was ingrained in me, so was the sense of entrepreneurship, wanting to be able to charter your own destiny, to control your own destiny. And while I worked in these amazing companies, these global companies, that sort of, that little person, that little entrepreneurial person sitting in the back of my head, was itching away to be able to do my own thing, to be able to build my own business from scratch. So I, at a relatively young age in my early 30s, I took the decision to go and start my own business. At the time, it was a software business, and a lot of people at the time thought, oh well, it was in the middle of the 1990s recession, so it was a tough time. There wasn't that many businesses that were succeeding, and it was a global recession. But in a sense, it was actually also a good time because, there was opportunities everywhere coming out of the recession. And so, Australia was just resetting. I'd just come back from Tokyo, where I'd been living for a couple of years. And so, it was a good time to, I guess, take the risk and start my own business. And, from there on in, I never looked back, to be honest. And that was at a relatively young age, I was only, I think, about 32 or 31. So, my son now today is, one of my sons is starting his own business as well, and he's at about the same age. So, I think that for me, it worked out well to have a really solid grounding in the corporate world, with a great, amazing corporate company that was global, and then trying to apply those skills to my own business. So I never look back in any other ways. To be honest, I can't have it. Now when I look back, I find it hard to believe that I actually worked for anyone else other than myself. But, you do need to get that experience, I guess, in some regards, to be able to set you up for success, because it is tough getting out there and trying to do your own thing.
Before we get into the hospitality side of your career, as you said, you started out as getting into property investment and property development, which still underpins a lot of the activities that you do today. How did that sort of come about? What drove the move into property investment?
Well, when I got out of the telco business that we'd started, we floated in the US. I didn't want to move my family. I had a young family at the time. So, I thought about, if I'm going to stay in Australia, what business am I going to be in? And, I'd already had a few investments in property. It's something that I was always interested in. And, Australia is, when it comes to property, I mean, there's a lot of people who have done very well in the property sector in this country. It's been a very successful part of the economy. And as our cities have grown and, and the country has grown itself, at the time, today Australia's 27, 28 million people. At that time, I think Australia was half the population. So, I could see that clearly the population was growing, the country was growing, the economy was growing. We had a minerals boom going on, which is still in place probably today. So it was the place where I sort of felt comfortable, where I could actually apply my creativity, because creativity has always been a part of what I do. I don't want to be a passive investor. I want to be an active investor. And so property was a logical step for me. And, a couple of developments later, you end up owning a property that happened to have a restaurant in it. And it wasn't doing so well. So I thought, well, it can't be that hard to go back into the business, despite the fact that my father promised me, or I had to promise my father I'd never go back into the business, but he'd passed away. So I turned my hand to the next entrepreneurial, risk-taking business, probably the most riskiest business you could possibly get into in some cases, which is the restaurant business. But combining the two, both property and hospitality, it's a good mix. And as it turned out, of course, it was at a time when hospitality was really on an upswing in Australia. But the country was becoming very wealthy. Young people were going out to restaurants 2, 3, 4 times a week. A lot of the pubs that I'd grown up in as a young kid, where, that's where you used to go out and socialise and meet and catch up with friends and so forth, a lot of those places had closed down over the years. And restaurants had become the new de facto meeting place. So there was all of a sudden there was a real boom going on in restaurants. Restaurants were becoming less formal. Prices were coming down, so they were becoming very accessible. And I saw that trend, and we jumped in, and I started creating sort of restaurants that were very, very demographic, very, very broad in their acceptance, And, I created, I guess, a bit of a model where, we combined entertainment with amazing food concepts and amazing fit outs. And owning the buildings in some cases gave me the opportunity, the flexibility to be able to really control the experience. And so, as it turned out, it was a good combination and still is today to a certain extent. I mean, we don't own all our buildings, obviously, because some of our restaurants are in, large complexes. But wherever we can, we do try and own the real estate because, again, we can control the outcomes. And also we can take the risks that we want to take. A lot of landlords, while they're very aligned and they can see what we create for them, they probably sort of are a bit risk averse. Whereas for me, sometimes I like to push the boat out. And in fact, probably in this industry in Australia, while there's a few others, I'm certainly one of those players that have really taken a lot of risks in terms of design and concept and ambition, and really, I think, created amazing entertainment complexes that probably would have been possible without us being able to own the real estate, I guess.
I wanted to ask you about risk taking. As you said, you've been a prolific risk taker over the years, the last 20 years in particular. How do you know when to risk, when not to risk? What's your sort of judge on that?
Well, I mean, again, it's sort of, you've got to take calculated risks. I mean, you've got to do your homework. There's no doubt about that. You just can't go out there and just, have a free-for-all, so to speak. But, to me, risk is something that I live with every day. So I don't allow it to affect my decision making. So I put risk to the back of the equation. We'll deal with that some way down the track in terms of whether we go ahead with the project or not. First and foremost, I think about why are we doing this project? Does it have a market? Does it obviously stack up from a development point of view if we own the building? And then I think about, well, if I'm convinced that there is a market, there's a product for this market, then the risk equation sort of comes into it. But to be honest, only in a small way still. I mean, when I look back upon it now and look at some of the projects and some of the risks that we have taken, especially, during COVID and coming out of COVID, you'd think to yourself, well, you really did go out on a limb there. But it's mostly paid off. And so I think the other thing too is, at the end of the day, the way I see risk is that it's not terminal if you make a mistake. And in fact, if anything, we all make mistakes. Well, we've made plenty of them. The question is, you've got to be nimble enough and you've got to move fast, recognise that, let's say, you haven't got something quite right, and you can turn it around. And again, if we own the real estate, that gives us an opportunity to do that. So I don't fear risk. To me, risk is just, as I said to you, part of the equation. I'm more fearful of making sure that we understand the market and that we're innovative and that we're always trying to be, very creative about what we think is the next, concept that can work in the Australian marketplace. Because the other thing too is, which we've talked about, is our country is still growing. Our cities are growing, and the demographic mix of our cities is changing. And so, like, in Melbourne today, one of the biggest diasporas now are Indians. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Indians. In my time, it was Greeks and Italians. So, you've got to think about, what sort of restaurants are you building? Because you've got to cater to a growing demographic that is constantly changing. And so, innovation is important to be able to deal with that. So you just can't keep on producing, in my view, the same types of restaurants that are producing the same types of food because people's tastes are changing.
Clearly, you're very innovative and creativity drives a lot of your thinking. Where does that sort of come from?
I don't know, maybe it started as a young age, but to me, I've never known anything else. I mean, as I said to you, from a creative point of view, I learnt back in the IBM days that, I mean, at the time, that industry, the IT industry, as it is today to a certain extent, it is a hotbed of creativity. So there is, these companies that are today are worth trillions of dollars, like Microsoft and Apple. They were the hotbed of creation. Sony, in Japan, created the Walkman. These are companies where it was all about creation. If you weren't thinking about, what the future looked like, you were left behind, right? And so I never knew anything else, to be honest. I've always been sort of, having grown up in the technology industry, which was, always talking about the future. Well, what's it look like 5 years from today? I mean, I remember in the early 80s, meeting technologists in Silicon Valley, and they were telling me about this thing called the internet. And I was trying to wrap my mind around it, and I was saying, look, in the future, everything's going to be handled electronically, and there's going to be personal devices. I think they were referring to the mobile phone probably, right? But I think they were talking to the fact that technology is going to be becoming more and more compact and more mobile and more accessible, right? And so, have a look at the impact the internet has had now. And funnily enough, probably the biggest change in the restaurant industry globally is the internet, is Instagram, is social media, TikTok, because it has actually turbocharged our industry. It has taken our industry from a mum and pop sort of family type business to big global players around the world today. Even the biggest brands in the world, like LVMH, are investing billions and billions of dollars in F&B. I met with the global head of Dolce and Gabbana only last week here in Sydney, and he was talking to me about how they're incorporating F&B concepts in a lot of their stores. And I didn't know, but I said to him, how many have you got so far? He says, oh, we've got over 50. So, I mean, all of a sudden, Dolce & Gabbana apparently is an F&B business, and so this industry is being really, really reset because the consumer today has a direct connection to their favorite restaurant or their favorite nightclub or their favorite cafe, and so they can literally turn on their phone and they'll be inundated with the latest dish or the latest fit out. And I mean, we're opening Grill Americano here in Sydney today, and we're sitting in this private room, and the lead up to the opening of this restaurant has been fueled primarily by social media, our messaging that's gone out through Instagram and through TikTok and through various forms of social media, including chats like this, which are going to go on YouTube. So it just so happened, I guess, that I happen to be able to be fortunate enough to have a technology background that actually, as it turned out, has been the main driver that's changing the face of F&B globally. You go to Europe today, there's a Nobu just about on every corner. There's a Zuma here and there's a Zuma there. There's Nobu hotels. GG restaurants are popping up everywhere. Saint-Tropez and, the Greek islands and all these holiday resorts are now full of international type of restaurants. And so there's a global boom on at the moment. In Australia, that's happening as well, and it's going to continue to happen. The industry, by the way, here is a very big industry. It's made up of lots of small businesses, but we employ as an industry nearly 700,000 young Australians, and there's another 600,000 or 700,000 Australians that supply this industry. So if you look at the supply chain, vignerons and farmers, etc., builders, etc., that do the fit outs, you're talking over 1.2 million people that that drive this hospitality economy that then drives tourism as well. So, when you look at, if you include tourism and hotels and resorts, it's well over 2.5 million workers. So it's a big part of the economy, massive part of the economy. And we've only touched the surface, I believe, here in Australia.
When you're beginning to develop a new concept such as this, what's the first tangible sort of step that you take, and then where does the process go from there?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I've been asked that question a lot in the last week here. How do we find this site here in Sydney? Look, it's all about the site. It's all about the building. It's about the uniqueness of the site. And once we find the right site, I can almost literally tell within a few seconds. I think I've been at it for so long now, whether a site is right for us, whether I think it can be, the home of a beautiful new restaurant. So for me, it's constantly looking at sites, buildings, projects, complexes. There's huge urban renewal going on across Australia, Brisbane and Sydney and Adelaide, Melbourne, of course, even Perth to a certain extent. All our major cities are actually undertaking huge urban renewal projects, huge infrastructure projects that are being undertaken as well. And so, new opportunities are popping up all the time. I mean, I've got a bit of a personal preference for older buildings. I love to be able to play around with heritage buildings. I think they've got a certain character about them, and I love the history. The site that we're in at the moment is the original Qantas building that was built in 1955. It was the first high-rise air-conditioned building here in Sydney. It's a beautiful building. It's a heritage facade building, and they don't build them like this anymore. This building is a wide building. It has an 81-metre frontage that sweeps along Chipley Place and round the corner to Hunter Street, right in the middle of Sydney. And it was vacant here, believe it or not, for 10 years. It had a small pop-up Specsavers, but pretty much vacant. And I couldn't believe this site had just been sitting there, for all these years, which, by the way, was the same with Chin Chin in Surrey Hills. We bought that building back in 2014. It had been vacant for 42 years. Beautiful heritage building. So for me, it's the building. And then I think about, well, what's the concept that would fit for that building? What's appropriate? Where is it? What's its neighbourhood? Because the other thing too is you've got to think about the neighbourhood. Okay, we're in the centre of the CBD here, but it has its own neighbourhood. It has its own, buildings that are around here that, mostly a lot of corporates. There's a lot of beautiful retail around here. This is a really vibrant hub here. A lot of other beautiful restaurants here, amazing other restaurants here. So for me, it was a really beautiful place to be able to not just, renovate an old building that was of such significance, the original home of Qantas, such an iconic brand in Australia, with the Wentworth Hotel, by the way, next door. But to do it in such a prominent place. And it's also just a few steps away from the new metro station. So, there's thousands of people pouring out of the metro station. Macquarie headquarters is just being built just above that metro station. You've got Chifley Tower across the road, the Power Tower of Sydney. And then you've got all these amazing iconic restaurants around here, like Rockpool and The Grill and Leaden Barrack and all these amazing restaurants, and Bistecca, iconic Sydney restaurants. So we're really lucky and honoured to be able to be here. But, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the fact that I saw this building and fell in love with it straight away, and it happened to be vacant. So yeah, it's about the building.
What about the business of hospitality? There's been a lot, particularly over recent years during COVID and after COVID, of restaurant businesses not being profitable and closing down. How have you been able to build this group so successfully?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's very tough being in small business in Australia. Australia is going through a bit of a rough patch, I think, when it comes to small business, sadly. There's a lot of regulation. The industry is way over-regulated, in my view, and I think that's not my opinion. I think that's the general opinion throughout the economy. Now, it's over-regulated, it's overtaxed, and productivity is in decline. So those are not good things. On the positive side, the cities are growing, and tourism is growing. And of course, as we talked about, the popularity of restaurants is still growing. But that drives the revenue side. The things that we've just talked about, productivity, regulation, taxes, etc., they drive the cost side. And that's not in a good place. And so, both at a federal level, a state level, and local government level, I mean, my personal view is we're way over-governed in Australia, and every level of bureaucracy brings its own costs and inefficiencies. So Australia's been it's been an amazing country. It's well respected around the world globally. It's still our home, of course, and I still think it's the best country in the world. I think the hospitality scene, despite these challenges, is one of the most talented and most dynamic in the world. You can come to Sydney and you can pick any restaurant you want, just about any cuisine, be it a casual restaurant or be it a fine dining restaurant. Same with Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane's going that way. So it's very dynamic, but we're doing it despite the fact that we're becoming more and more regulated rather than less and less regulated. Now, that is impacting small business. Now, from our point of view, of course, my solution is scale. So, you've got to be able to in Australia deal with scale, and because it's a high cost business environment, we have one of I think we're actually the highest casual labour rate in the world, with penalty rates on Saturdays and Sundays. And so we've got one of the highest labour rates in the world. Occupancy is one of the highest in the world. Construction and fit out is one of the highest in the world. So it's a high cost business environment. So, but you can't let that stop you from getting on with things. So our view is scale. Pardon me. And our plan, of course, is to continue to expand nationally. We're probably the fastest growing national group in the country for a la carte dining, and we've got international expansion on the horizon as well. So we're working on projects at the moment that we hope will come to fruition in the not too distant future, about taking our brands globally, just like many other great cities have done as well. So you've seen the expansion of other brands around the world. I think there's 50 or 60 Nobus now around the world. Carbone are expanding aggressively. Zuma are expanding aggressively. Ennismore and Accor are growing aggressively. And as I said to you, all the luxury brands are getting into F&B. There's absolutely no reason why Australia shouldn't be taking our amazing products to the world. So for us, it's scale and getting efficiencies. But at the same time, my advice to policymakers is, don't take us for granted. As I said to you, we employ a huge chunk of the Australian workforce, and if small business isn't looked after better, if the economic elements of our cities and our country aren't set right, if the settings aren't set right to allow people to be able to risk capital, even if it means a small, tiny little cafe, and be able to get a reasonable return, right, then we're going to suffer as a country, because small business is the engine of the economy. It is where creation starts. It's where young people get their first go at business. We started off as a tiny little business. And we've been able to grow, and yes, we're a great Australian success story, but there should be many more. It shouldn't be that hard, and I'm hoping that the respect that the industry deserves, and I'm talking about small business at large, it needs to change. It can't take small business for granted. Today. I think to open a small business today in Australia, I was just looking at some data through our new Restaurant and Cafe Association, which we established to try and put forward, new ideas and innovation for policymakers, so that we could actually help small business. It costs nearly 25% of your risk capital today to open a small business. All of it is government charges. Now 10 years ago it was 3 or 4%. So that's quadrupled, or more than quadrupled. And you've got to pay that money up front before you even open the doors. So it's too high. And so we shouldn't have barriers like that. We need to be making it, as I said to you, easier for people to be able to open their dream, to pursue their dream of entrepreneurship. And Australia was built on the back of entrepreneurship. Not just, my parents, but, for as long as I can remember, people came to Australia to live their dream, to start their small business, and to make a life for themselves. Now, there's a lot of very successful people in Australia today that started off with tiny little businesses that came here, didn't even speak English. And here they are today. They've made huge contributions, enormous contributions to our country, enormous. And we've got to make sure that's still able to, you're still able to do that. And so I do worry about that. That's a concern, that, there's a huge amount of pressure on margin, huge. So whether you're big or whether you're small, in our Restaurant and Cafe Association, we did a survey. Over 90% of small businesses are struggling to make a living. That's just unsustainable. That's way too high, that number, and it's got to change. All right. So we've got to have a vibrant industry. We've got to be able to support our small businesses.
You've got, I think, at last count, 2,500, 3,000 employees as part of the broader Lucas Collective group. How do you manage that from a day-to-day perspective, and what do you look for in terms of creating like a high-performance team, high-performance culture?
Yeah, well, so again, I go back to my days in the tech world, and IBM was one of the great educators in the corporate world. So they used to spend almost 5% of their annual revenues on training and development. A huge amount of money. So I've been always a proponent of training. Train, education. You can never have enough of that. So for us, we allocate a huge amount of our investment dollars to in-house training and to external training. So we collaborate with a lot of educators around the country to make sure that our people are being given the best opportunity to learn the latest about what our professional, high-powered, high-efficiency hospitality industry operator should look like. Now, to make a real difference, one of the things I've established only a few months ago is the new Lucas Foundation, Collective Foundation, which is something that I've been wanting to do for many, many years. And it's my way of sort of giving back to the industry because, it's my stage in my career. I look back upon how good it's been to me and how great this company's been. I've been wanting to think about, how I can, give back to this industry that has been so good, because I want this industry to always grow and be respected and be a vital element of the economy, because it employs so many young people. So many young people get their first job in hospitality, but we want to be better than that. And so my foundation is being formed and created, and the money that I've allocated to it will go towards doing that. To working with educators, we've formed a partnership with La Trobe University to create Australia's first dedicated hospitality degree, which will be a proper professional, ground-up, industry-based degree where young people can come into our industry and actually get a qualification in hospitality, a real, genuine qualification that's recognised anywhere else in Australia and globally. We're going to undertake, we've already just started a dedicated research into what does our industry need to be able to be sustainable and growing. So we don't know a lot about what makes our industry successful. We know anecdotally, but we haven't done the research, and a lot of universities are focused on other things. So for me, it's important to be able to point some research towards our industry, grab that data, and then use that data to be able to better educate, better train, make our industry more viable and more efficient, and continue to make it world class, because it can't be just about, the quality of the dish anymore. It has to be about a whole lot of other things. And the other thing too is we're looking into what should be the best practices for employing and encouraging young people to come into the industry. We want to be an employer that's safe to work for, that embraces young people, that supports them both intellectually as well as providing a great workplace where they can enjoy. They can be inspired. They can enjoy to come to work and feel as if they can make the hospitality industry a lifelong career. And so my foundation's going to be dedicated to doing that as well.
What about in terms of consistency across venues, regardless of which Lucas Group restaurant you go to, the experience, the theatre, the immersive sort of feelings that you get? How do you create such consistency across the venues, even when you're not there?
Yes, well, of course, the old thinking of you had to be there to physically make sure these things are work. I mean, that's an old concept, of course. You can't be everywhere. However, you are right. So you are only as good as your last experience. And so we put a lot of effort, a lot of investment into making sure that our service standards are very consistent. We don't always get it right. I mean, it's a tough business to be able to get your service standards as high as they possibly can and on a consistent basis. But on the key measurements that we apply to ourselves, we do pretty well. So, we're in the 90% quartile in terms of, service standards, cleanliness, reservation systems, being able to, deal with complaints and so forth. So, it's a whole package that we measure ourselves on, and we measure ourselves on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis. And so we're really fixated on making sure that we have this saying in our business that which we try to teach all of our young employees, that the one key simple measure that you should always be thinking about is that the guest should be leaving the venue wanting to come back. It's as simple as that. If they are leaving your venue wanting to come back, that means, for all intents and purposes, you've met their expectations. Or you've exceeded their expectations. The other thing that we instill in our development and our training and our culture is we've taken the word no out of the vocabulary. So in Lucas restaurants, the word no doesn't exist. Now, I know that sounds a little kitsch, but what we've tried to emphasize here is that we're a can-do business. We are a service-based industry. And we want to be able to give our guests the experience that they want. And today it's all about individual customization as well. We want to be able to make sure that if they want a particular type of drink, or, they want to sit in a particular place, or they want a type of restaurant experience, or they want to book a boardroom and they want it in a particular way, we'll bend over backwards to give it to them. And so, there's a very famous New York restaurateur called Danny Meyer. He said that you can spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars building the most exotic restaurants and hotels and so forth, but it can be all undone by one simple bad experience, where he calls him the gatekeeper. He's referring to the employee. He says no, and so in our business, the word no doesn't exist, and I think that drives a certain baseline culture. Which means that, we just won't accept anything below that. And that drives consistency, and that drives standards. And as I said to you, you've also got to be able to communicate it simply, because, you don't want to inundate young kids with a lot of detail. So the simple objective of saying to them, well, you just got to make sure that when the guest leaves the premise, they're wanting to come back. It doesn't always happen, of course, because you can't please everyone, but you've got to be able to please most of the people most of the time.
Changing consumer preferences, how have you seen that over the course of the last decade or two?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a huge dramatic change in that. There's been a massive casualisation of the hospitality industry. So, when I was a young guy, restaurants, or there was only a small handful of restaurants, and most of them were very expensive experiential restaurants, that you'd go to if someone else was paying, right? Today, today restaurants are the new counter meal. You know, they've become the everyday go-to, whether they're a casual restaurant or even sort of an aspirational restaurant. I mean, we look at this beautiful restaurant that we've just created here, Grill Americano, but the key to Grill Americano's success is that while it looks glamorous and looks amazing and sexy and sophisticated, it's a very egalitarian restaurant. You know, we're serving a $25 burger at the bar. You know, as well as an amazing pasta or a beautiful lobster dish. So, you know, it's got a little bit of everything, and we welcome, you know, people to walk in at any time. You know, just that doesn't have to be about reservations, because, you know, we have a yes mentality, right? And so at the end of the day, you know, that would never have taken place 10, 15 years ago. You know, a restaurant would have been, you know, very narrow in its focus, you know, and very much driven by what the chef would create. Whereas today, my restaurants are more about the vision that I create, you know, the marketeer, you know, the salesperson, the, you know, the as they call it, the vibe, right? The energy that a place exudes. So restaurants, as I said, have become much more egalitarian, which I'm a working class boy. So to me, that's something that I've always been pushing and at the forefront of doing, you know, making restaurants accessible, affordable, you know, fun, relaxed places, you know, no informality. And I think that reflects today's world. So even my most ambitious restaurants, you know, they still have a beautiful sense of informality about them. You know, Society is probably, I guess, it's regarded as one of the best restaurants in Australia, if not in the world. You know, it was awarded the best wine list out of London 2 years running as the best wine list in the world. I mean, you know, true international recognition. And it is truly a restaurant of international standard. There is no restaurant like it in this country. But it's still got a sense of informality about it and friendliness. You know, there's nothing stiff about it, you know. You know, our most popular selling dishes are roast chicken. I love roast chicken. And now, you know, some people might turn their nose up at it, but, you know, it's been popular for a reason because, you know, people are hankering for that sort of, you know, that style of food to a certain extent, but it's still been a beautiful environment. So that's what's really pretty much changed, you know, and also as a result of that, you're seeing a lot of restaurants of all different types, also driven by, I think, our amazing multicultural immigration, which Australia, of course, is renowned for globally. You know, we've got 160 races, you know, 180 or whatever that is. It's a huge melting pot, cultural melting pot. And that means we're lucky enough to see amazing restaurants, you know, Sri Lankan restaurants, Indonesian restaurants, Vietnamese restaurants, Korean, you know. It's not just Spanish and Italian or Chinese. So, you know, you know, you go to a great city like Rome, great food city, one of the best in the world, but 98% of their restaurants are Italian. You know, they're all serving pasta, or they're serving, you know, a braised dish or, you know, artichokes if they're in season. But if you're looking for a cool sushi place, it's hard to find. If you go to Tokyo, where I lived for quite a few years, while it's changing, it's you know, it's still pretty rigid. You know, 90% of the restaurants are Japanese. And the sushi restaurants all follow a very strict, you know, historical view of what sushi should be.
When you go on your travels and you're a regular traveller, how do you bring back, so say for example, you've got Maison Batard, sort of a French influence, Grill Americano, modern Australian or Italian, you've got, you know, Japanese venues within your stable. How do you nail the food in each of these venues, even though they're all so different, but it's the food's phenomenal in each of the venues? How do you sort of get the inspiration to bring that back and deliver it so well?
So we're a little unique globally, by the way, not just in Australia. So we're a little unique globally. If you look at the larger restaurant businesses, they pretty much have one single brand, right? Very few have multiple brands of different types of restaurants. You know, Nobu just does Japanese restaurants. Zuma does just have a Japanese restaurant, just does the same Japanese restaurant. In fact, the same menu, right? And so, you know, what we've created with us, which is why we've changed our name to The Collective, we are one of the unique businesses around the world which has such a huge breadth and depth of different cuisines and different types of restaurants. So, you know, we're a multi-branded restaurant business. And that is very unique in the restaurant world. And as you talked about, very diverse. Japanese, Italian, Asian, Thai, Malaysian, French. Now, what brings that all together, though, to answer your question, is that I've applied a very Australian sensibility to the food. So it doesn't matter whether it's French, it doesn't matter whether it's Greek or whether it's Italian. I like to protect the ingredients and the essence of the food, but I overlay it with an Australian sensibility, an Australian template of what we like and how we like to eat in this country. An example is, for instance, maison bâtard. Now, French food traditionally is known for its, huge use of butter and cream and so forth, right? And, it's amazing, but it's very rich. And even the French today themselves are not eating as much of that type of food as they used to. They're looking for lighter ingredients. So we created our menu, where we've taken a lot of the butter out. Virtually there's no cream in any of our cooking. Now, a lot of the French traditionalists, you can't make a beef bourguignon, without lashings of red wine and butter. We'll keep the red wine, but we don't need to, layer it up with loads of fat, because, that's not the way we eat here in this country. So we did the same with chin chin. Chin chin was this phenomena when we first opened, and still is today. But it had nothing to do necessarily with traditional family-run restaurants that, produce traditional Thai food, because traditional Thai food, as good as it is, it's very hot, very spicy, very sugary, right? And again, that doesn't necessarily suit the Australian palate. And so my view was, I love the essence of Thai food, but I don't want it burning a hole through the back of my head. I want to be able to have a glass of wine with it if I possibly can, right? Rather than just a bintang beer. So we took a bit of the heat out. We took a lot of the sugar out. We rebalanced the dishes. We recreated them, and we introduced a lot of beautiful fresh Asian herbs. Now, they used fresh herbs, of course, but we sort of, doubled down on it to give the dishes a sense of freshness. And suit the Australian palate, and that's why chin chin became such a phenomenon, and still is today, because it has a very broad appeal. People can bring their kids, and they can eat the food, and it's not, it's not so spicy or garlicky or sweet and sour. It's got those essences, but in a more Australian way. So I guess that's something again that's unique for us, because when we've talked to international groups or hotels about, potentially taking our brands there, I think that's one of the things they like about it, because, globally, people are trying to be a bit healthier. They want to go to restaurants 3 or 4 times a week or more often, and to do so, they're looking for experiences that are a bit more conducive to being able to fit their lifestyle. And our lifestyle is especially here in Sydney, for instance, a very outdoorsy city. Everyone's out running along Bondi and, getting fit and so forth. There's no use creating, like a heavy braised dish, with lots of fats. And even though fats bring a lot of flavour, we've been able to, re-engineer it in such a way that we can still deliver the flavour, but without the heaviness.
What motivates you?
I've been at this a long time, I guess. I've been in business, 45 years, the best part of my life. And I grew up in small business. I've never really known anything else. It's, I don't know anything else. I think that, people, there was a great business mentor that I had many years ago, a very successful Australian businessman. And he said that, you got to die on the job, because, and you lose relevance if you all of a sudden, let's say you sell out, or you retire for once. I mean, I never really understood the concept of retirement. It might suit others, but I deeply love what I do. And to me, it's not a job. And I know you've probably heard that millions of times before from other people, but it's true. If you really love what you're doing, and you don't feel it's a downer on your life. For me, creating and building restaurants inspires me. It energizes me. Today we're about to open the doors here for our first lunch service, and there's going to be 120 happy faces in there. When I walk around a restaurant, one of my restaurants, and I see people enjoying themselves, smiling, and drinking wine, having fun, I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be. I think to myself, well, we've ticked the box. We've done our job here, and it has a flow-on effect to the city as well. Imagine our cities with our restaurants. They'd be pretty boring places, right? You can have as many corporate towers as you want. You can build as many train stations as you like. You can bring as many tourists to Australia as you like. But if we didn't have amazing restaurants, amazing cafes, amazing nightclubs to go to, that's what brings our city together. That's the cultural gel that brings us together. And to be involved in that, for me, it just, it energizes me. It keeps me young. I also, I think about 80%, 90% of my employees are all under the age of 35, and that keeps me young too. I really get energized working with, fresh young minds that, bring a different vitality to our thoughts and the way we go about our restaurants. Virtually most of my management team now are in their 30s. Now I think about 60% of our management team are female. So, they bring this amazing dynamic that we haven't had before. And so, what drives me? Creation, watching people come into restaurants and with a smile on their face. Hopefully they've still got a smile on their face when they leave. And meeting new people, like today, the last week or so, I've probably met, hundreds and hundreds of people I'd never met before here in Sydney. They've been very welcoming, very warm, wanting to engage. And, as they say, you get lots of friends in the restaurant business. And I'd rather be in this business, let's say, than be a dentist or a lawyer or something like that. Not that they're not great professions, but, for me, this restaurant industry has been something that I've known all my life. It inspires me every day, and I guess making people happy is just something for me that I just see that every morning gives me an opportunity to wake up and say, well, let's keep doing what we're doing, because what we're doing, I think, is good. It's good for our cities, good for our kids, good for our culture. And I just think that we've only just skimmed the surface. I really do think that Australia, if we make sure the government doesn't get in our way, hopefully, the next 10 years in Australia, next 20 years in Australia are going to be amazing. These cities are going to be even bigger cities, and I think there'll be even more restaurants than we could even imagine. So I can't wait to be part of that.
What are the keys to success in business?
Well, you've got to be humble. You've got to, don't, success is very hard earned, and don't take it for granted, So I think that humility and making sure that you've earned your success, but be respectful of the process, because you're only as good as your last gig, and also potentially you're only one bad decision away from potential catastrophe. It doesn't. There's many stories littered around the industry and the economy where people were once considered high flyers and amazing businesses and so forth. They're here today, gone tomorrow, and so I'm always cognizant of that. When you grow up in the world that I grew up in, working class, country boy in the back of a pub, sweating away, watching my father work, 100 hours a week. you don't take anything for granted, and it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter whether you're, the most successful person in Australia. You've got to constantly, I think about it in such a way that it could end tomorrow. And so you've got to, that way, stay on your toes. And as I said to you, I think the Australian culture is about a bit humility. I think it's a great thing. I think one of the things I love about, our country. My father always used to say, that he loved Australia more than his homeland because Australia was, a fair go and a country that was so accepting of people, but also a country that had respected and appreciated humility. And so I guess for me, they're sort of the key ingredients as we progress forward. You get a lot of people in this industry slapping you on the back saying, oh, it's amazing, your restaurant's incredible. And while we love that adulation, you don't want to let that go to your head. You don't want to let that go to your head because it's a tough business. And you've got to make sure that at the end of the day, you're doing a lot of things right. And you've got to try and get more things right than you get wrong. And so you've got to just not get too carried away with yourself.
Have you been able to overcome challenges and hurdles throughout your career?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, everyone's had ups and downs, and as again, I've always tried to learn from our mistakes, but don't let our mistakes or our failures overcome us. Take over our psyche because they're just a mistake. And in fact, they're really a learning experience. I've learned more from the mistakes, and I'm sure you've probably heard this from many people you've interviewed. You learn more from your failures and your mistakes than you do from your successes. And so I just don't allow those things to tie me down or, depress me in any way. They're actually opportunities to go, okay, let's go back, analyze it, see where we went wrong, let's fix it. And so, I think that's probably the most important element of being able to understand that, there's going to be ups and downs. The other thing too is, look, I think I've been through about 6 recessions, maybe a couple of hundred wars, and there's wars all over the place in the world of today. And people always tend to talk about, oh, this is not a good time. This is a tough economic environment, or war's about to break out. I mean, I think I've opened a couple of restaurants in the middle of potential big wars. I remember that we opened the Botanical Hotel in the middle of the Iraq invasion. So, and then, we opened another great restaurant around the GFC time. We opened, a restaurant, whether it's been in high inflationary times or poor economic times, property crashes. At the end of the day, I try to take the cycle out of it. A lot of people fuss about the cycle. I think if I worried about the cycle, I'd never open anything. I'd never buy a building. I'd never open a restaurant, because you can't foretell the future, right? My solution has always been, look, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be cycles. There's going to be recessions. There's going to be recoveries. But my focus is on the product. If the product is right, if the building is right, if the way you run your business is on sound fundamentals, then it doesn't really matter, because you'll succeed no matter what. I mean, there is another adage, is that, look, in the food industry, it is a little bit recession-proof. I mean, people do have to eat, but that doesn't mean to say that you still have to have the same type of pricing or the same type of product. So you've got to be able to be obviously adaptable. But yeah, I don't worry about cycles, and I don't worry about economic fortunes. Or in fact, to be honest, I dismiss a lot of that talk. I pay it some attention, but I'm not going to sit there worry about the interest rate cycle. To be honest, I know a lot of property people do. And a lot of people make their decisions around, IRRs and, cap rates and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think that way. I think about, well, what sort of restaurant can I create? And if it's good enough, they will come, And at the end of the day, sometimes, we're faced huge, cost overruns. I mean, building Batard, for instance, coming out of COVID, there was a huge jump in costs. And, some people said, oh, we should just pull the project, Well, that doesn't even come into consideration for me, because my view is I'm trying to create restaurants that are here for the next 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years, right? And you've got to see through the cycle. And sometimes, in some view, it is going to cost what it's going to cost, then you've got to think about, well, okay, it's cost this much. How do we make that work? So we changed the business model at Batard quite a few times to adapt to the fact that this whole development was going to cost, almost twice as much as what we originally planned. It's a big jump, 100%, right? But we had to suck it up, and then we had to for me, it was, we're halfway through a development cycle. We can't walk away from the project. So it was, well, what can we do to double down? And so, I built a basement. I said, well, let's build a nightclub in the basement. I said, they said, well, we need the basement for refrigeration and all this sort of stuff. I said, well, none of that earns money. I said, let's build an amazing club in the basement. Oh, but that's going to cost a lot of, X amount of millions of dollars. I said, well, we're digging a hole. We're in a hole. We might as well dig a bigger hole and turn it into a nightclub. And that's been, absolutely, a phenomenon in Melbourne, a beautiful, late night supper club, which really Australia hasn't had for, ever probably. And so, and then Drake turned up from out of nowhere and decided to have an opening party there, and, 145 million followers on Instagram, saw our little humble club there in Melbourne being flashing all over the internet, and all of a sudden it's become the hottest club in Melbourne, if not in Australia. So, that was millions and millions of dollars building a hole that no one wanted to build, but we had to do it because my view was I had to get a return, and on the costs that were spiraling, not because of anything we'd done, but we were in this unusual sort of price escalation that came out of COVID, so we just had to deal with it.
Final question: when you look at your life and your career so far, what are your proudest achievements? And then what does the next 10 or 20 years look like? How will you go about this international expansion, do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I better say that my proudest achievements, of course, are my children. So we'll just square that away. And my beautiful wife that, who's been very supportive, in fact, has played a very key role in a lot of the design work that we do with the restaurants. I've got 3 great kids, and my wife Sarah's got 2 young daughters that my stepchildren who are like my kids as well. So I've got sort of 5 kids that I love, and they're all on their way doing their own thing and their own journey. So I'm very proud of them. But I think that if there's a legacy to leave, it is that in my small way I've made a contribution to, taking our cities and putting them on the international stage when it comes to F&B. Creating restaurants that are, I think, are respected around the world, not just in Australia, but people come in from all over the world and look at Maison Batard and say, look, we haven't quite seen anything like this, or Society, or even Chin Chin, which is a casual fun restaurant, but it's fascinated so many people. So it's I guess it's probably the most thing that I'm most proud of, that people say, well, Chris Lucas has played a pretty key role sometimes. I get a bit embarrassed by it, but it's nice to hear him say that I've played a key role in revitalising our cities, energising our cities from an F&B point of view, and also, doing hospitality the right way. Making sure that hospitality industry is respected, and that it's an industry where it employs so many young people that it's a great, safe, protected place where people can come in here and be inspired, as I talked about. And I think I was interviewed last week and I was talking about it. We'd done some homework. We've employed over 200,000 young Australians in the last 30 years while I've been in this business. that have come through our doors, and they've all gone off to have careers in lots of different places, not just in the restaurant industry. We've had a lot of young kids that have come in here. Their first job is working in a restaurant, and gone off to be, in private equity and running bags of big corporations nowadays. So I think that's the other thing that I'm really proud of, that we've given so many young Australians their first start, and we've done it in the right way, a respectful way, and that has been a benchmark for how this industry should be run. And at the same time, as I said to you, we've played our role to make our cities hopefully a better place.
Chris Lucas, it's been a privilege. Thanks so much for your time once again.
Pleasure.